This video is brought to you by Devout Decals, makers of reusable Catholic art for your home altar, your bedroom, and your home classroom.
It's an open secret. The Vatican is going broke. A lot of this has to do with many of you, and people just like you, everyday Catholics, refusing to open their wallets and give in the collections for the missions of the papacy or for other collections, and sometimes even just the general tithing. Many of you are refusing on principle to do this because the Vatican often uses this money for evil purposes. Many of you are refusing to give to the general tithe at all anymore because you know that the diocese essentially takes a cut of that tithe and that the Vatican then takes a cut of what the dioceses collect. So many of you don't want to be involved in that anymore at all. And you have found alternate ways to do your Catholic duty for tithing. You're going to hear now from a cardinal, one who is not exactly the most well-known figure in the church, who has just flat out come out and said that that Pope Francis is essentially delusional. This is a cardinal from Africa who is responding to a letter that the Vatican made public from Pope Francis. I'm not going to read the letter here. It's basically a letter from Pope Francis asking for more fiscal responsibility from the cardinals and for them to help with the fundraising. And the cardinal denounces it essentially in an interview. He rolls his eyes during the interview, as described in the article, and he basically accuses Francis of being a hypocritical tyrant. And this is on the issue of financing, and he lets hint a few things. For instance, you might be aware of the story of Cardinal Angelo Becciu. He followed after Cardinal Pell and was a key in the investigations of finances and the rest, but instead of being like Cardinal Pell and before him Vigano, where they would discover bad things going on and try to fix them, Becciu was one who would keep the investment game going. You remember the Elton John movie that was partially financed by the Vatican, the London real estate deals that were partially financed by the Vatican. These caused international headlines, and because they were a hot mess. They were absolutely bad deals, and they were illicit, if not fully illegal. Caused a big firestorm, and at the end of the day, Cardinal Becciu became the fall guy for this. And I say the fall guy, even though if you go watch some of my old videos on Cardinal Becciu, it really did look like he was the mastermind behind all of it. But after the fact, it became pretty clear that he was simply following orders from higher up. Think about that as much as you need. Take all the time as you need to go over this. So we're going to turn to Celere Non Possum for this headline. The Pope writes to the Sacred College, work to find economic resources, a cardinal responds. The cardinal interviewed in this piece remains anonymous, and that for obvious reasons, as you're going to hear. He has nothing positive to say about this letter to the cardinals asking for more financial responsibility and for more support from the cardinals to fix the Vatican's financial woes. The Vatican is running a deficit. They're running out of money. The deal with the government of Cardinal Zen's homeland comes to mind, as there have been a lot of accusations that that deal, every time it's renewed between the Vatican and that state, that there's a quiet transfer of a lot of money going on to help support the operations of the Vatican as a sort of thank you very much and keep your mouth shut about the evils going on here that we're doing to the church. It begins to make more sense when you realize the Vatican is going broke because of corruption and because the laity just don't want to have a part of this anymore. So here's what the cardinal has to say when he's asked about this letter. Quote, Your Eminence, why this letter? The prelate rolls his eyes and replies, another marketing operation. If people knew the truth. We ask him, therefore, to explain what he thinks and how things really are. He writes to us cardinals when that apostolic constitution, which is a riot of juridical errors, was approved without even taking us into consideration. It was presented to us after the fact, and the consideration we made afterwards were thrown away by those who worked day and night, sweating and spitting blood to the point of publishing a full text of errors. By now, the economic management of the Vatican is practically under his absolute control. He also manages the apartments as if he, Pope Francis, were a hotelier. For years he has been saying that we must be poor, poor, poor. In the pontificate of poverty, we have accumulated a debt that is greater than that of the years preceding his becoming pope. His expenses and those of his most faithful are many. Do not forget that those who enter Santa Marta always do so with nice envelopes. All the great men of finance who every now and then, not always, appear in the bulletin do not go empty-handed, explains the cardinal between one bite and another. We ask, but where does all this money end up? End quote. Do you hear the accusation that there are very well-to-do, out of charity, we'll say presumably Catholics with financial resources who come to visit Santa Marta, where Pope Francis lives, with envelopes in their hand? What do you think's in the envelopes? They come bearing cash gifts. And for what purpose? One could say, in charity, that these are to support the works of the Holy Father and, missions and the rest of the things. There's certainly more to it going on than that. And the cardinal's accusing Pope Francis and those cardinals around him, his most loyal advisors, of living high on the hog, of living well beyond the rhetoric of being poor that Pope Francis constantly likes to talk about. And he's asked that question at the end, and now here's his response. Quote, he makes transfers here and there. If someone shows up and asks, he explains and tries to fool them with some magic word. People who move around a lot, the poor, the needy, those confused about the reality of the flesh. He replies the cardinal. In fact, Solere non Possum published exclusively the video of Monsignor Michel de Tolve speaking on the phone with the pontiff, who reassured him that he had made the requested transfer and took care to anticipate that another one would have to leave in the following days. The realities, however, are many. Just think of Luca Casarina with his NGO, the nuns who took care of those confused about the flesh. That caused a firestorm when that happened. Street priests, journalists, and television, etc. Francis does not spare any expense, even when he has to put up his friends in the best apartments of the APSA. At the same time, however, he asks the cardinals to tighten their belts. It is more about marketing operations than actual changes, also because by now there will be very few of us left at the helm of certain departments. Why doesn't the Pope take care of all the expenses that Mauro Gambetti has made and is making in the Fabbrica di San Pietro and in the Basilica? Maybe this is what he means when he says that we must find the resources independently. Should we do as he does? Invite the big managers with criminal records? Does the Pope really believe that these people would give us money for free at Amore Dei? It is clear that these people want something in return. Maybe the Vatican museums at their disposal at night with an exclusive view. Maybe some intercession in the political or health sphere. We know how it works. A call, Your Eminence, they tell you, continues the Cardinal freely. Moreover, it was Francis himself who tightened the screws on this point of view to avoid corruption. He also removed any subsidized rent prices from the cardinals. Fortunately for the majority, not Cardinal Burke, they have not yet come into force. Then there is always accusatory language in his letters, just as it happened with the Roman priests. The Pope writes, despite the difficulties and at times that temptation of immobility and rigidity in the face of change, many have been the results achieved in these years. I thank you for your help you have given and continue to give. The Cardinal always responds. He accuses of immobility and resistance all those who tell him that the thing is wrong or could be done differently. Do you know, children, when you take chocolate out of their mouths, they tell you that they are starving them. They don't understand that they can eat something healthier. He has not yet understood the resistance of some to these reforms. I am referring to this one of Predicate Evangelium, but also to In Ecclesiatem Communion. It is not because we are immobile or anything else, but because we are very clear that these are not applicable reforms. We are not a company. We are the Church of Christ. Explain to the Pope how this reform has borne fruits. The offices have increased, the structures have increased, and the expenses have increased. And now, he's asking us to find the money ourselves? End quote. A lot of that is in reference to the structural reforms that Pope Francis has done. That didn't get a lot of coverage from your podcasters because it would look like a lot of inside baseball stuff. How the Roman Curia operates and the hierarchical nature of things. The most noteworthy thing for most laity has been the change of certain things from being called congregations to dicasteries, like the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith becoming the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and a sort of downgrading of their eminence. But at least in the post-conciliar era, The practice has always been when the Vatican was going to reform itself in its structures for running things, it always sought the advice of the College of Cardinals. That has not been the case under Francis. Instead, he works with his Council of Nine, these hand-picked cardinals who, to Francis's credit, if he's going to have such a council, he had them from kind of across the ideological spectrum within the church. As long as they were Vatican II loyalists, he'd have some conservative ones, some moderate ones, and some soupage type ones on that council. And this cardinal's very upset about this, because the College of Cardinals hasn't been convened for anything except to get a lecture from Francis here and there. That's all they've ever been summoned for by Francis, and even then, very rarely. It was noteworthy when he finally called them a couple of years ago. And this cardinal sounds like he represents the voice of most of the College of Cardinals in being very, very upset about all this. Here's how upset he is. Quote, "He has been in Buenos Aires for years. We have served the Holy See all our lives, and we are very clear about the problems, dynamics, and needs arriving from the end of the world. We should also do so with humility and understand that you cannot arrive with a solution without knowing the problem. First, you have to know and listen. You cannot trust those with whom you fall in love for a few months and then chase them away." He takes Pope Francis's letter and puts it on the table and says, "You see, here," he writes, "so that the efforts of those who have contributed to the heritage of the Holy See are not wasted. But how much money has been squandered in these years because of him and his most loyal followers? He sent to trial and convicted a man who had made an investment, Cardinal Becciu, as his predecessors did. If we did not invest church money, how could we make this heritage grow? Instead of attacking these lay people who have eaten out our expense and wanted to cheat us, he inflicted harm on a cardinal of the Holy Roman Church. Would this not be wasting the efforts of those who contributed to this heritage?" The prelate refers to the trial of Cardinal Angelo Becciu. End quote. Becciu was certainly the fall guy. That's becoming pretty obvious in hindsight. In fact, just before he was sentenced, he was invited to the one time the cardinals were called, and he was given a front row seat, a seat of honor. Very odd how that played out. But note that last paragraph. It's calling Francis out for her hypocrisy on synodality. Synodality, we're told, is listening to voices who are not typically heard, not making unilateral decisions, and decentralizing authority, while he ignores the College of Cardinals, ignores the rather traditional way popes have governed when it comes to internal matters unique to the Holy See and how they are organized and governed. Instead, he acts like a king. Some have compared him to Pius IX and some of the things that were less than popular that Pius X did. I know, not theologically, to be clear. There's no comparisons there. Both of those were Orthodox popes when it comes to their theology. But in terms of the more tight grip he keeps on Rome, that's how he's compared, except also there's the not subtle accusation of corruption. Now, are you surprised by this? Are you surprised that a cardinal would anonymously have lunch with a journalist and just spill the beans on everything going on internally in Rome? That he would essentially call Pope Francis a hypocrite in no uncertain terms on the issue of finance? He would essentially accuse him of being corrupt or of allowing corruption to fester among those closest to him on financial matters to the Vatican, to the squandering of the church's treasure and of the treasure given by laity out of their pocket. Remember, from across the world, it's already, most of my audience is American, and vast majority of the rest of you are in Western Europe. Rich countries. And it's pretty insulting to people from rich countries, right? But imagine those Catholics who are from less than rich countries, who are from the developing world, as it gets called, who give of the very little treasure they have to the church in expectation that it'll be faithfully managed by the Holy See and done wonderful good things for Christ with that money. And instead it gets squandered so that a few cardinals closest to Pope Francis can live lavish lifestyles. Not to mention the accusation of rich men showing up with envelopes to give directly to the Pope for who knows what reasons in exchange for some perks that aren't available to the rest of us. Are you surprised that a cardinal would say this stuff that publicly? Are you surprised that this interview hasn't gotten reproduced by LifeSite or by any of the more independent, critical news outlets in the English-speaking world? Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition, there are links in the description box below to Patreon, Subscribestar, and other things that viewers have asked so that they can help keep these messages coming daily, as well as that join button below. Because your support does keep these messages coming daily and does greatly appreciated. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.